July 15, 1976, Riverside, California. Some secrets stay buried for decades, but DNA never forgets. In the summer of 1976, when America was celebrating its bicentennial and the nation buzzed with patriotic fervor, a young woman's life was brutally cut short in what would become one of California's most haunting cold cases. For nearly 5 decades, her killer walked free, believing time had erased all traces of his horrific crime. He was wrong. The case that would consume investigators for generations began on a sweltering July evening in Riverside County, California. While families across America gathered for 4th of July barbecues and fireworks displays, 23-year-old Lisa Marie Caldwell was preparing for what should have been an ordinary night shift at the local diner where she worked to support her college dreams. Lisa had everything to live for: a psychology major at UC Riverside. She was just 1 semester away from graduating with honors. Her friends described her as the kind of person who lit up every room she entered, someone who volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and tutored struggling students for free. She had recently gotten engaged to her high school sweetheart, Davide, and they were planning a small wedding for the following spring. But Lisa never made it to work that night. Her body was discovered 3 days later by a jogger in a remote area of Box Springs Mountain, approximately 15 miles from where she was last seen alive. The condition of her remains would haunt the responding officers for the rest of their careers. The brutality of the attack suggested a killer filled with rage, someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department immediately launched what would become one of their most extensive investigations. Detective Raymond Torres, a 20-year veteran who had seen his share of violent crimes, later described the Lisa Caldwell case as the one that never let him sleep peacefully again. The evidence collected at the scene painted a picture of a calculated predator, someone who had likely done this before. What made this case particularly chilling was not just the violence inflicted upon Lisa, but the methodical way her killer had attempted to cover his tracks. He had clearly spent time at the scene, arranging evidence in a way that suggested he was either forensically aware or had experience with law enforcement procedures. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was the work of someone who had planned every detail. The investigation consumed the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for months. They interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, followed up on countless tips from concerned citizens, and pursued every lead, no matter how remote. Lisa's case became front-page news across Southern California, with her photograph appearing in newspapers from Los Angeles to San Diego. The public demanded answers, and law enforcement was determined to deliver them. But as weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, the leads dried up. The killer had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and a grieving family desperate for justice. Lisa's parents, Robert and Helen Caldwell, never stopped believing that their daughter's killer would eventually be caught. They attended every court hearing for similar cases, hoping to spot a familiar face. They kept her room exactly as she had left it, waiting for the day when they could finally say goodbye, knowing her killer was behind bars. The case that began in the bicentennial summer of 1976 would span 5 decades, outliving some of the original investigators and testing the limits of forensic science. It would survive the transition from paper files to computer databases, from basic fingerprint analysis to advanced DNA profiling, from local investigations to federal task forces. What no one could have predicted in 1976 was that the key to solving Lisa Marie Caldwell's murder would eventually come from a technology that didn't even exist when she died. A technology that would reach back through decades of carefully buried secrets and finally give a voice to a young woman who had been silenced far too soon. This is the story of how the FBI cracked one of California's most enduring mysteries, and how justice, though delayed, would finally find its way to Lisa Marie Caldwell. The year 1976 marked a pivotal moment in American history. As the nation celebrated its bicentennial, California was experiencing unprecedented growth and social transformation. Riverside County, nestled between Los Angeles and the desert communities of the Coachella Valley, represented the new American frontier where suburban dreams met rugged wilderness. The region had exploded in population throughout the 1970s as families fled the crowding and crime of Los Angeles, seeking affordable housing and a slower pace of life. New subdivisions sprouted across former orange groves and cattle ranches, creating communities where neighbors still knew each other's names and children could ride their bicycles safely through tree-lined streets. Riverside itself was a college town anchored by the University of California campus, which had grown from a small agricultural college into a respected research institution. The campus buzzed with the energy of nearly 10,000 students, many of them first-generation college attendees whose families had migrated to California seeking better opportunities. The psychology department where Lisa Marie Caldwell studied was particularly renowned, attracting ambitious students who wanted to understand the human mind and help others overcome trauma and mental illness. Lisa embodied the optimism of her generation. Born in 1953 to middle-class parents who had moved to California from Ohio in the 1960s, she represented the American dream in action. Her father, Robert, worked as a supervisor at the local General Motors plant, while her mother, Helen, taught elementary school. They had saved every penny to ensure their daughter could attend college, something neither of them had been able to do. The Caldwell family lived in a modest ranch-style home in the Canyon Crest neighborhood, a middle-class enclave popular with university faculty and young families. Their street was lined with palm trees and featured well-maintained lawns where children played and neighbors gathered for weekend barbecues. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their community. Lisa's daily routine reflected the simple pleasures of 1970s college life. She attended morning classes, studied in the university library during the afternoons, and worked evening shifts at Mel's Diner on University Avenue to help pay for textbooks and wedding expenses. The diner was a local institution, serving comfort food to students, faculty, and longtime residents who had watched the community grow around them. Her co-workers at Mel's remembered Lisa as someone who always volunteered for the difficult shifts and never complained about demanding customers. She had a natural ability to diffuse tension and make people feel heard, skills that would have served her well in her chosen career as a counselor. The restaurant's owner, an elderly Greek immigrant named Konstantin Papadopoulos, often said Lisa reminded him of his own daughter and treated her like family. The summer of 1976 brought particular excitement to the Riverside community. The bicentennial celebrations had created a sense of patriotic unity, with red, white, and blue decorations adorning storefronts and homes throughout the area. The university had organized special events, including historical reenactments and concerts that drew visitors from across Southern California. Lisa was actively involved in the Bicentennial Planning Committee, helping coordinate a psychology department booth at the campus celebration. Her professors praised her organizational skills and dedication to community service. She had already been accepted into the graduate program and planned to specialize in trauma counseling, inspired by her volunteer work with veterans returning from Vietnam. The engagement to David Morrison had added another layer of joy to Lisa's life. They had met during their sophomore year in a statistics class and bonded over their shared love of hiking and their dreams of making a difference in the world. David was studying to become a social worker, and they often talked about opening a counseling center together after graduation. Their relationship represented the changing social dynamics of the 1970s. Unlike their parents' generation, Lisa and David lived together openly, sharing a small apartment near campus. They were planning a simple wedding ceremony in the university chapel, followed by a reception in Helen's backyard. The guest list included classmates, professors, and the tight-knit community that had embraced them both. The Riverside of 1976 felt safe and predictable. Crime statistics were low compared to urban areas, and violent incidents were rare enough to make front-page news in the local paper. Residents took pride in their community's family-friendly atmosphere and the sense of security that came with knowing their neighbors. This peaceful facade would be shattered forever on that July evening when Lisa Marie Caldwell disappeared, forcing the community to confront the reality that evil could strike anywhere, even in paradise. July 15th, 1976, started like any other Thursday for Lisa Marie Caldwell. She attended her morning abnormal psychology lecture, spent the afternoon reviewing for her upcoming comprehensive exams, and prepared for another evening shift at Mel's Diner. The temperature had soared to 98 degrees, typical for a Riverside summer, and the campus felt sluggish under the oppressive heat. Lisa left her apartment at 4:30 p.m., giving herself plenty of time to walk the 12 blocks to the diner for her 5 p.m. shift. She wore her standard work uniform, black slacks, white button-down shirt, and comfortable walking shoes. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried her psychology textbook, planning to study during any slow periods at the restaurant. The route from her apartment to Mel's Diner was one Lisa had walked hundreds of times. University Avenue bustled with typical late afternoon activity as students headed to jobs, professors drove home from campus, and families prepared for dinner. Several witnesses later confirmed seeing Lisa walking along her usual path, appearing relaxed and unhurried. At 4:45 p.m., Lisa stopped at the corner market 3 blocks from the diner to buy a bottle of water. The store clerk, 19-year-old Marcus Chen, remembered the transaction clearly because Lisa had commented on the heat and mentioned looking forward to the air conditioning at work. Security cameras captured her leaving the store at 4:47 p.m., walking west toward University Avenue. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Lisa Marie Caldwell alive. When Lisa failed to arrive for her shift, the evening manager at Mel's Diner initially assumed she was running late due to the heat. Lisa had never missed work without calling, but the oppressive temperature had caused several employees to arrive behind schedule that week. By 5:30 p.m., however, concern began to mount. Konstantin Papadopoulos called Lisa's apartment repeatedly, but received no answer. He then contacted her roommate, Patricia Williams, who was studying at the library. Patricia confirmed that Lisa had left for work as scheduled and expressed immediate alarm at her absence. The two women had lived together for 2 years and maintained strict communication protocols for safety reasons. David Morrison received the call about Lisa's disappearance at 6:15 p.m. while working his summer job at a local construction site. He immediately drove to the diner, then retraced Lisa's walking route, searching every alley, parking lot, and building along the way. Other friends and co-workers joined the impromptu search party as word spread throughout their close-knit community. The Riverside Police Department received the missing person report at 8:30 p.m. Officer Janet Rodriguez responded to the call and initially followed standard protocol for adult missing persons, noting that Lisa was over 18 and had been missing for less than 4 hours. However, the unanimous testimony from friends and family about Lisa's reliability and the unusual circumstances prompted immediate action. Detective Raymond Torres arrived at the scene by 9 p.m. and quickly recognized the seriousness of the situation. Lisa's personal belongings, including her purse and textbook, were nowhere to be found along her route. Her car remained parked at the apartment complex, and she had not accessed her bank account or contacted anyone in her social circle. The initial search focused on the area between Lisa's apartment and the diner. Officers canvassed every business, interviewed dozens of potential witnesses, and examined security footage from the few establishments that had cameras. The investigation revealed that Lisa had simply vanished during a 15-minute window between leaving the corner market and arriving at work. As night fell, the search expanded to include nearby parks, vacant lots, and the undeveloped areas surrounding the growing city. Volunteers from the university community joined law enforcement in combing through brush and checking abandoned buildings. The effort continued through the night and into the following day, but yielded no trace of Lisa or her belongings. The breakthrough came on July 18th, 3 days after Lisa's disappearance. Morning jogger Kevin Patterson was running his usual route through the foothills of Box Springs Mountain when he noticed what appeared to be clothing partially hidden beneath a cluster of manzanita bushes. The remote location was approximately 15 miles from where Lisa was last seen, accessible only by a winding dirt road that few people knew existed. The discovery of Lisa's body marked the beginning of one of Riverside County's most intensive criminal investigations. The crime scene revealed evidence of extreme violence and suggested the work of someone with detailed knowledge of the area's geography and law enforcement procedures. The discovery of Lisa Marie Caldwell's body transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation that would consume the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for months. Detective Raymond Torres assembled a task force of 12 investigators, making the case the department's highest priority. However, the investigation would be plagued by missteps, false leads, and technological limitations that allowed the real killer to escape justice for decades. The crime scene at Box Springs Mountain presented both opportunities and challenges for investigators. The remote location had preserved some evidence from the elements, but the 3-day delay between the murder and discovery had compromised crucial forensic materials. The 1976 forensic toolkit was primitive compared to modern standards, relying primarily on fingerprint analysis, blood typing, and witness testimony. Investigators collected fiber samples, photographed tire tracks, and gathered what biological evidence they could find. The coroner determined that Lisa had been sexually assaulted and strangled, with additional injuries suggesting a prolonged attack. The positioning of her body and the careful removal of identifying jewelry indicated a methodical killer who had taken time to stage the scene. The first major lead came from a gas station attendant who claimed to have seen Lisa getting into a blue sedan on the afternoon of her disappearance. This witness description launched an intensive search for blue vehicles in the area, leading investigators to focus on 3 potential suspects who owned cars matching the description. The primary suspect became 42-year-old Harold Brennan, a maintenance worker at the university who had been fired 2 weeks before Lisa's murder for inappropriate behavior toward female students. Brennan owned a blue 1974 Chevrolet Nova and had no solid alibi for the time of Lisa's disappearance. His criminal history included a conviction for assault in 1968 and several arrests for public intoxication. Investigators spent 6 weeks building a case against Brennan, interviewing his associates and searching his property. They found suspicious items in his garage, including rope similar to that used in the crime and clothing with what appeared to be bloodstains. However, the primitive blood typing technology of 1976 could only determine that the stains were human blood of the same general type as Lisa's, not a definitive match. The case against Brennan began to unravel when his ex-wife provided an alibi that placed him in Los Angeles, visiting his sick mother on the day of the murder. Hospital records confirmed his presence, and multiple witnesses corroborated his story. The rope and clothing evidence proved inconclusive, and investigators were forced to release him after 8 weeks of intense scrutiny. The second major suspect emerged from Lisa's personal life, Gregory Hoffman, a former boyfriend who had struggled to accept their breakup 6 months earlier, became the focus of investigation after friends reported his obsessive behavior and threats. Hoffman had been seen near Lisa's apartment building on multiple occasions and had a history of domestic violence with previous girlfriends. Investigators discovered that Hoffman had called in sick to his job at a local auto parts store on the day of Lisa's disappearance, claiming to have food poisoning. His supervisor noted that Hoffman seemed agitated and nervous when he returned to work the following week. A search of his apartment revealed photographs of Lisa and detailed notes about her daily schedule. However, the case against Hoffman also collapsed when investigators learned that he had been arrested for drunk driving in San Bernardino County at 3 p.m. on July 15th, hours before Lisa's disappearance. The arrest report and booking photos provided an ironclad alibi that eliminated him as a suspect. The third suspect, construction worker Anthony Valdez, emerged after witnesses reported seeing him arguing with a young woman near the university campus on the day of the murder. Valdez had a history of violent behavior and had been questioned in connection with 2 other assaults on college-aged women. However, investigators could never place him at the crime scene or establish any connection to Lisa beyond the questionable witness identification. As 1976 turned into 1977, the investigation stalled. The task force had interviewed over 300 people, followed up on hundreds of tips, and pursued every lead to its conclusion. The physical evidence collected at the scene remained in storage, waiting for forensic technology that wouldn't exist for another decade. The failure to solve Lisa's murder haunted the investigators involved, particularly Detective Torres, who continued working the case even after his official retirement in 1995. By the spring of 1978, the Lisa Marie Caldwell investigation had officially transitioned from an active homicide case to a cold case file. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department had exhausted all viable leads, interviewed every potential witness, and pursued hundreds of tips that led nowhere. The case that had once commanded a 12-person task force was now relegated to a single detective who reviewed the file periodically between other assignments. The impact on Lisa's family was devastating and enduring. Robert and Helen Caldwell struggled to comprehend how their daughter's killer could simply vanish without a trace. Robert took early retirement from the General Motors plant, unable to concentrate on his work while his daughter's murder remained unsolved. Helen continued teaching, but became increasingly withdrawn, finding it difficult to connect with her students when her own world had been shattered. The Caldwell family home became a shrine to Lisa's memory. Her bedroom remained exactly as she had left it on that July morning in 1976, with textbooks still open on her desk and her wedding dress hanging in the closet. Helen visited the room daily, sometimes sitting for hours among Lisa's belongings, hoping for some sign or inspiration that might help solve the case. David Morrison struggled with survivor's guilt and the loss of his future wife. He completed his social work degree, but left Riverside immediately after graduation, unable to bear the constant reminders of Lisa throughout the community. He eventually married and started a family in Northern California, but friends noted that he never fully recovered from the trauma of losing Lisa in such a violent and senseless way. The University of California Riverside campus implemented new safety measures in response to Lisa's murder, including improved lighting, emergency call boxes, and escort services for students walking alone at night. However, the sense of innocence and security that had characterized the community was permanently altered. Parents became more protective of their children, and students were more cautious about their daily routines. Detective Raymond Torres refused to let the case die completely. Even as he was assigned to new investigations, he continued reviewing Lisa's file during his spare time, searching for overlooked clues or new angles to pursue. He maintained contact with the Caldwell family, providing updates whenever any new information emerged, no matter how insignificant it might seem. The 1980s brought advances in forensic science that offered new hope for solving cold cases. DNA analysis emerged as a revolutionary tool for criminal investigations, but the technology was expensive and time-consuming. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department had limited resources for testing old evidence, and Lisa's case competed with dozens of other unsolved murders for priority. In 1987, Detective Torres submitted biological evidence from Lisa's case for DNA analysis, but the results were inconclusive due to degradation of the samples and limitations of early testing procedures. The failure was particularly frustrating because investigators believed they had collected sufficient evidence to identify the killer if the technology had been more advanced. The 1990s saw periodic revivals of interest in Lisa's case. Local television stations featured her story during sweeps weeks, and true crime magazines published articles about the unsolved murder. Each media report generated new tips and potential leads, but none resulted in significant breakthroughs. The case file grew thicker with false confessions, mistaken identifications, and well-meaning but ultimately useless information from the public. Robert Caldwell died of a heart attack in 1994, having never learned the identity of his daughter's killer. His final years were marked by declining health and deepening depression as he realized he might never see justice for Lisa. Helen continued her solitary vigil, maintaining hope that advances in forensic science would eventually provide answers. The turn of the millennium brought new developments in DNA technology and database systems that offered unprecedented opportunities for solving cold cases. The Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS, allowed law enforcement agencies to compare evidence from unsolved crimes with DNA profiles from convicted offenders across the country. In 2003, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department established a dedicated cold case unit with funding specifically allocated for reviewing unsolved murders from the 1970s and 1980s. Lisa's case was among the first selected for comprehensive review, marking the beginning of a new phase in the decades-long search for her killer. The stage was set for the technological breakthrough that would finally bring justice to Lisa Marie Caldwell. The breakthrough in Lisa Marie Caldwell's murder came not from traditional detective work, but from the revolutionary field of genetic genealogy that emerged in the late 2010s. Detective Maria Santos, who had inherited the cold case unit in 2015, decided to submit Lisa's evidence for advanced DNA analysis using cutting-edge technology that could extract profiles from severely degraded samples. In March 2023, the California Department of Justice Crime Lab successfully developed a complete DNA profile from biological evidence collected at the Box Springs mountain crime scene 47 years earlier. The profile was immediately uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database, but yielded no matches among convicted offenders. However, Detective Santos recognized an opportunity to employ genetic genealogy, the same technique that had solved the Golden State Killer case in 2018. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in genetic genealogy investigations. Scientists uploaded the killer's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where individuals voluntarily share their genetic information to research family history. The search identified several distant relatives who shared DNA segments with Lisa's killer. Genetic genealogist Dr. Barbara Ray-Venter, who had worked on numerous high-profile cold cases, was assigned to build family trees connecting the DNA matches. The painstaking process involved analyzing birth records, marriage certificates, obituaries, and census data spanning multiple generations. After 6 months of research, Dr. Ray-Venter identified a family lineage that could have produced the DNA profile found at the crime scene. The investigation narrowed to 3 potential suspects: brothers who were descendants of the identified family line and would have been adults in 1976. All three men lived in Southern California during the time of Lisa's murder, making them viable candidates. Detective Santos began the delicate process of obtaining DNA samples from each suspect without alerting them to the investigation. The first suspect, 68-year-old retired mechanic Frank Kowalski, was eliminated when DNA collected from his discarded coffee cup failed to match the crime scene profile. The second suspect had died in 2019, but investigators obtained a sample from his stored medical records that also proved negative. The third suspect was 71-year-old Walter Novak, a former security guard who had worked at various locations throughout Riverside County during the 1970s. Novak's employment history revealed that he had been fired from a security position at UC Riverside in 1975 for inappropriate behavior toward female students, a detail that had never surfaced during the original investigation. Surveillance teams observed Novak for several weeks, documenting his daily routines and waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample. The breakthrough came when Novak visited a local restaurant and left behind a water bottle. Laboratory analysis confirmed a perfect match between Novak's DNA and the biological evidence from Lisa's murder scene. Further investigation into Novak's background revealed a pattern of concerning behavior that had gone undetected for decades. Employment records showed he had been terminated from multiple security positions for violations of protocol involving female employees or students. Former co-workers described him as someone who made inappropriate comments about women and seemed to harbor resentment toward educated females. Most significantly, investigators discovered that Novak had intimate knowledge of the Box Springs mountain area where Lisa's body was found. His security work had included patrolling remote locations throughout Riverside County, and he had often bragged about knowing every back road and hiking trail in the region. This geographic familiarity explained how he had been able to transport Lisa's body to such an isolated location and escape detection. The FBI became involved in the case due to the interstate nature of genetic genealogy databases and the potential for federal charges. Special Agent Catherine Walsh coordinated with local authorities to ensure the arrest was executed flawlessly, preventing any possibility of Novak fleeing or destroying evidence. On October 15, 2023, a joint task force of FBI agents and Riverside County deputies arrested Walter Novak at his home in Moreno Valley. The 71-year-old suspect offered no resistance and appeared stunned that his decades-old crime had finally caught up with him. The arrest marked the end of a 47-year investigation and the beginning of a legal process that would finally bring justice to Lisa Marie Caldwell and closure to her surviving family members. The arrest of Walter Novak sent shockwaves through the Riverside community and beyond, marking the resolution of one of California's longest-running cold cases. News of the breakthrough spread rapidly through social media and traditional news outlets, with headlines proclaiming that advanced DNA technology had finally delivered justice for Lisa Marie Caldwell after 47 years of waiting. Helen Caldwell, now 89 years old and living in an assisted care facility, received the news from Detective Maria Santos in person. The elderly woman, who had spent nearly 5 decades wondering about her daughter's killer, broke down in tears upon learning that the man responsible would finally face justice. Helen had never remarried after her husband's death and had dedicated her remaining years to keeping Lisa's memory alive through scholarship funds and victim advocacy work. The arrest brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief to Helen, who realized that both she and her late husband had lived most of their lives not knowing who had taken their daughter away. She expressed gratitude to the investigators who had never given up on Lisa's case, particularly Detective Torres, who had maintained contact with the family until his own death in 2018. David Morrison, now 68 and living in Sacramento with his wife and grown children, learned about the arrest through a phone call from Detective Santos. The news reopened wounds that had never fully healed, bringing back memories of the young woman he had planned to marry and the life they would never share together. Morrison had followed advances in forensic science over the years, always hoping that technology would eventually solve Lisa's case. The University of California Riverside community reacted with a combination of satisfaction and somber reflection. Current students, most of whom had never heard of Lisa Caldwell, learned about the case through campus newspapers and social media posts. The university announced plans to establish a memorial garden in Lisa's honor, recognizing her as a symbol of the victims whose cases had been solved through persistence and scientific advancement. Walter Novak's arrest revealed disturbing details about his life and potential connection to other unsolved crimes. Investigators discovered that he had moved frequently throughout California and Nevada during the 1970s and 1980s, working security jobs that gave him access to college campuses and young women. The FBI launched a comprehensive review of unsolved murders and sexual assaults in areas where Novak had lived and worked, seeking potential connections to other cold cases. Neighbors in Novak's Moreno Valley community expressed shock at learning that a suspected killer had been living among them for decades. Many described him as a quiet, unremarkable man who kept to himself and rarely interacted with others. The revelation that someone capable of such violence had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 50 years disturbed residents and highlighted how predators could successfully blend into communities. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once Novak was in custody. Faced with overwhelming DNA evidence and a detailed investigation that had reconstructed his movements in 1976, Novak's defense attorney advised him to accept a plea agreement. In February 2024, Novak pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The resolution of Lisa's case became a symbol of hope for families of other cold case victims. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department reported a significant increase in requests to review unsolved murders using genetic genealogy techniques. The success story demonstrated that even decades-old cases could be solved with modern technology and dedicated investigators willing to pursue justice regardless of how much time had passed. Dr. Barbara Ray Venter and the genetic genealogy team received widespread recognition for their role in solving the case. Their work highlighted the growing importance of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations and sparked discussions about privacy rights and the use of public DNA databases for law enforcement purposes. The media coverage of Novak's arrest and conviction brought national attention to the evolution of forensic science and its impact on cold case investigations. True crime podcasts and television documentaries featured Lisa's story as an example of how persistence, technology, and family advocacy could combine to deliver justice even after decades of waiting. Helen Caldwell lived to see Novak's conviction, but passed away peacefully in her sleep just 3 months later, finally able to rest, knowing that her daughter's killer would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Her obituary noted that she had dedicated her life to seeking justice for Lisa and supporting other families affected by violent crime. The case of Lisa Marie Caldwell serves as a testament to the power of never giving up hope and the remarkable advances in forensic science that continue to give voice to victims who were silenced far too soon.